The cold, unyielding wind swept through the cemetery as mourners gathered beneath a heavy, gray sky. It had been one of those mornings where the sun seemed reluctant to rise, leaving the world in a muted, somber state of twilight. The low murmur of voices blended with the soft rustling of leaves, creating an eerie calm that made the heart ache even more. A funeral was always a reminder of how fragile life was, how easily everything could slip through your fingers. And yet, for Michael Anderson, this was the day that would change everything, not just because of the death of his wife, but because of what would be revealed. He could feel it in his gut, that sense of impending doom. It had been hanging over him for weeks, months even, but today, everything would come to light. His wife, Claire, had passed away unexpectedly. She had been sick for years, but no one had seen this coming. One minute, she was in the hospital, struggling to breathe. The next, she was gone, leaving him standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure of what to do next. Her death had come with a mix of sorrow and relief, but mostly, guilt. Michael didn't know how to describe it. He'd always loved Claire, but there had always been something missing between them. An unspoken distance. And now, standing at the front of her funeral, he couldn't shake the feeling that the weight of that distance was suffocating him. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together, his fingers digging into his palms to keep himself steady. He wasn't sure if it was the grief or the anticipation that had him so on edge. Perhaps it was both. But he could feel the eyes of the mourners on him, judging, wondering, questioning. He'd been married to Claire for 12 years, and though their marriage had been quiet, even dull at times, people had always assumed they were happy. They had a house, a family, a life built on years of routine. But routine had been shattered in ways no one could have expected. He glanced to his left, where she stood, Emily. The pregnant mistress. Michael's heart skipped a beat. The sight of her standing so close to him, in the middle of his wife's funeral, made him feel like he was suffocating. How could he have been so reckless? How had he let it get this far? He'd been seeing Emily for almost a year. At first, it had been just an affair, a stupid, selfish escape from his stagnant marriage. But it had become more. Much more. And now, as he stood there, pretending to mourn his wife, he realized how much his life had unraveled in the past few months. Emily's presence at the funeral was a reminder of everything he had done wrong. Her round belly, swollen with his child, seemed to mock him. And yet, there was something else in her eyes, something dangerous. She wasn't just a mistress anymore, she was a ticking time bomb. Michael couldn't help but feel the weight of her gaze as she stood beside him. The others around them didn't know, of course. They couldn't. But the tension between them was palpable. He could feel it in his bones. And then, the moment that would change everything arrived. The funeral service was moving along, the priest speaking words of comfort, the mourners whispering their condolences. But Michael barely heard any of it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the events that had led up to this day, the affair, the lies, the hidden pregnancy. And now, his wife was gone. Claire would never know the truth. She had been too sick, too consumed by her own pain to notice what was happening in the shadows of their marriage. But the guilt still ate at him. As the ceremony continued, Michael's eyes flicked over to the corner of the cemetery, where a figure had appeared. The man was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit, his face unreadable. Michael didn't recognize him at first, but there was something about the man's presence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The lawyer. He was here. Michael's pulse quickened. What was he doing here? He hadn't expected him to show up today. This wasn't the time. Wasn't the place. But there he was, moving toward him with a determined stride, his eyes locked onto Michael with an intensity that made him feel exposed. The crowd around them seemed to blur, the sounds of the funeral fading away. Michael's thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. "Mr. Anderson," the lawyer said, his voice low but urgent. "We need to talk." Michael blinked, unsure of how to react. His mouth went dry as the man reached him, and he instinctively glanced over at Emily. She looked at him with narrowed eyes, but said nothing. Michael swallowed hard and nodded, his heart pounding. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The lawyer didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pulled an envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Michael. It was heavy, sealed with a dark red wax. Michael's stomach churned as he took it, the weight of the envelope in his hands suddenly feeling like a leaden burden. "Your wife's will," the lawyer said simply, his voice colder than the breeze that whipped through the cemetery. "There's something you need to know." Michael felt the world tilt beneath him. The will. Of course. He had completely forgotten about it. Claire had been ill for so long, and she had always talked about getting things in order. But now, at this moment, the will was here, and it felt like the beginning of something far more sinister. The lawyer gave him a hard look before continuing. "There's information in there that you need to read. I suggest you do so immediately." Michael wanted to protest, to tell the man that it wasn't the right time. But as the lawyer's cold gaze pierced through him, he knew there was no avoiding it. He tore open the envelope with shaking hands, the wax seal cracking beneath his fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly typed, with Claire's signature at the bottom. Michael's eyes skimmed the words, his pulse racing as he read. The first few lines were typical of any will, about the distribution of assets, the division of property. But then, the next paragraph made his stomach drop. "Michael, I know what you've done. I know about Emily. I know about the child." The words were like a slap to the face. He froze, unable to comprehend what he was reading. How could she have known? How had she found out? "I didn't want to confront you while I was alive," the letter continued. "But you need to understand something. I've made arrangements. I've made sure you'll be taken care of. But there's more. The child you're expecting isn't yours alone." Michael's heart raced. What did that mean? Was it possible that Claire, his sick, dying wife, had known everything? Had she known about Emily's pregnancy? Had she known about the affair? "I'll explain everything in the coming days," the letter concluded. "But for now, I need you to understand this: the truth will come out, whether you're ready for it or not." The letter slipped from his fingers as he looked up at the lawyer, the room spinning around him. His entire world had just been turned upside down. The lawyer took a step back, watching him with cold, calculating eyes. "I'll see you tomorrow at my office. We need to discuss this further." Michael stood there, numb, as the weight of the letter pressed down on him. The funeral, the mourning, the carefully constructed lies, none of it mattered anymore. His wife's last words had torn open a Pandora's box he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But it was too late now. The truth had been revealed. And there was no going back. The sun was setting as Michael drove through the winding streets, the low hum of the engine beneath him doing little to quiet the chaos in his mind. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles pale in the dim light, the letter still clutched in his other hand. The words Claire had written were like a weight pressing down on his chest, suffocating him, making it difficult to breathe. How could she have known? How had she known about Emily and the baby? The last few hours had felt like a blur. After the funeral, after the lawyer's revelation, Michael had felt as though his world was spinning out of control. The other mourners, the sympathy, the words of comfort, it had all seemed so distant, as if he were standing outside of it, watching his life unravel from the sidelines. And now, driving to meet the lawyer, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking straight into a trap, one that had been set long before his affair with Emily had ever begun. How much had Claire really known? How deep did her suspicions go? The drive felt endless. Michael had never taken this route before. It was a backstreet path that led to the lawyer's office, old, weathered buildings lining the sides of the road, each one as dark and silent as the thoughts in his mind. The deeper he drove, the more isolated he felt. It was as though the world had closed in on him, leaving only his own guilt and the growing sense of dread. Finally, the lawyer's office appeared in the distance, a small, unremarkable building nestled between two larger, more imposing structures. The neon sign above the door flickered, casting a pale glow over the cracked sidewalk. Michael parked the car and stared at the office for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. What could the lawyer possibly want to discuss that was so urgent? What more was there to know? He reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, a sudden thought stopped him cold. Could this be a trap? Could Claire have set this all in motion before she died, knowing that the truth would eventually come to light? Shaking off the thought, he stepped out of the car, his shoes scraping against the asphalt as he walked toward the office door. He reached for the handle and turned it, the door creaking open with a groan. Inside, the office was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of old leather and dust. A single light hung above a large wooden desk, casting long shadows across the room. The lawyer was sitting behind the desk, his steely eyes fixed on Michael as he entered. "Mr. Anderson," the lawyer said, his voice clipped. "Please, have a seat." Michael didn't respond. He simply nodded and sat in the chair across from the lawyer, still holding Claire's letter in his hands. His fingers trembled slightly as he placed it down on the desk, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on his chest. "I trust you read the letter?" the lawyer asked, his tone neutral. Michael nodded again, his voice thick with confusion and anger. "Yes, I read it. But I don't understand. How could she have known?" His voice cracked, and he paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "I thought I'd been so careful. I didn't think she knew anything." The lawyer's expression remained unchanged, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked almost like pity. "She knew more than you think," he said softly. "Your wife wasn't as naive as you believed." Michael felt his stomach drop. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The lawyer leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping the surface of the desk with a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Claire wasn't just sick. She knew about your affair, Michael. She knew about Emily. And she knew about the baby." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "But that's not all. She also knew something else, something far more dangerous." Michael's mind was spinning. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his frustration growing. The lawyer's lips curled into a thin smile, one that did nothing to reassure Michael. "Your wife had a plan, Michael. A plan to make sure that you couldn't hide from your mistakes. She was always one step ahead of you." A cold chill ran down Michael's spine. "What kind of plan?" he asked, his voice tight. The lawyer reached for a file on his desk and opened it slowly. Claire left detailed instructions. She had her lawyer look into everything, your finances, your business dealings, everything. She knew that when she was gone, you would try to cover up your tracks, erase the evidence. But she made sure that wouldn't happen. Michael's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" The lawyer slid a few papers across the desk to him. "This," he said, his voice barely audible. "These are the documents Claire left behind. They include copies of emails, text messages, and financial records. They show everything, your affair, the payments to Emily, the cover-ups. She even had a copy of the paternity test." Michael's blood ran cold as he flipped through the papers. Each page seemed to stab him deeper than the last. The evidence was undeniable. The emails, the bank transfers, the records of his secret meetings with Emily, everything was there, in black and white. How had Claire managed to gather all this? The lawyer's voice cut through his thoughts. "There's more. Claire made sure that you would be held accountable for everything, whether it be through the will or through other means. You might think you can erase the past, but it's already too late. You've been exposed." Michael felt the walls close in on him. His hands shook as he set the papers back down, staring at the damning evidence in front of him. This was worse than he could have ever imagined. He had been so focused on his affair, on the lies he had been telling himself, that he had never considered the possibility that Claire had been plotting his downfall from the moment she found out. The lawyer's eyes softened, just a fraction, before he continued. "I'm not here to judge you, Michael. But I am here to make sure that you understand the gravity of the situation. You can't run from this anymore. Claire made sure of that. And now, it's up to you how you handle the consequences." Michael swallowed, his throat dry. "What do I do now?" The lawyer leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "There are options. But you'll need to act quickly. You'll need to be strategic. The first thing you need to do is stop trying to cover it all up. The truth is out, and the only thing left for you to do is figure out how to deal with the fallout." Michael felt a sense of helplessness wash over him. For the first time in years, he was completely at a loss. He had no control over anything anymore. Everything he had worked for, everything he had tried to protect, his family, his reputation, his life, was slipping through his fingers. The lawyer stood up, his face unreadable. "I'll give you some time to think things over. But I need you to understand that there are people out there who are going to want answers. Claire's family, for one. They've already started asking questions. And once they find out what's in those papers," he let the sentence hang in the air, the weight of it suffocating Michael further. Michael nodded numbly, his mind reeling. What happens next? The lawyer's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "What happens next is entirely up to you. But remember, Michael, this isn't just about your past. It's about your future. And if you don't face the consequences now, they'll catch up with you in ways you can't imagine." With that, the lawyer turned and walked to the door, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. As the door clicked shut behind him, Michael sat in silence, staring at the papers in front of him. His heart hammered in his chest, and for the first time in his life, he realized that there was no escaping the truth. It was too late to run. And now, he would have to face the consequences of his choices. The night was oppressive, its weight pressing down on Michael like a physical force. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of papers on the desk and the distant hum of the city outside. His mind refused to stop racing, replaying the conversation with the lawyer over and over again. He could still see the lawyer's cold eyes, hear the calculated words about Claire's plan, the evidence, the inevitable consequences. It all felt like a bad dream, a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. He had spent hours poring over the papers, the emails, the text messages, the bank records, and every time he thought he had a grasp on the situation, another piece of the puzzle would fall into place, exposing a new layer of deceit, of betrayal, of a life he didn't recognize as his own anymore. But it wasn't just the lies that were suffocating him, it was the reality of what was coming next. Claire's family would be furious. They would want answers, they would demand justice, and they would hold him accountable for everything. Michael knew that much. What he didn't know was how far Claire had gone with her plan. How much of it was still hidden, waiting to be uncovered. How much of his life was about to be ripped apart. And then there was Emily. The woman who had been his escape, his distraction, his second chance. She had been pregnant with his child. But now, that too was tainted. What if Claire's suspicions were right? What if the baby wasn't his after all? The thought made Michael's stomach churn. He picked up the glass of whiskey on his desk and took a slow sip, trying to calm the storm inside him. His thoughts kept drifting back to the funeral. Emily had been there, standing beside him, her round belly visible beneath the fabric of her dress. She had looked so out of place. So wrong, and yet, in some sick way, it had felt like she was the one who had the most to gain from Claire's death. But was that true? Or was that just the paranoia talking? Michael slammed the glass down on the desk, the noise echoing through the room. He couldn't keep doing this. He couldn't keep questioning everything and everyone around him. He needed answers. And he needed them now. He grabbed the phone on his desk and dialed Emily's number, his fingers trembling as the phone rang. The sound of the ringing was like a countdown, each second ticking away like an impending bomb. She picked up on the third ring. "Michael?" Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, something that made him uncomfortable. "What's going on? I thought we agreed to take some time before talking." "I can't wait," he said, his voice low, tight. "We need to talk. Now." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Okay," Emily said, her tone shifting to something more guarded. "Where do you want to meet?" He hesitated for a moment, trying to decide where would be the best place for this conversation. Where could he confront her without risking everything? "My place," he said finally. "I'll be waiting." She didn't say anything more, just hung up with a soft click. Michael set the phone down and stood up from his desk, his mind racing once again. What was she hiding? What did she know? Did she have her own plans, just like Claire had? He didn't know what to think anymore. There was too much uncertainty, too many questions, and no clear answers. All he could do was wait. And pray that whatever was about to happen would somehow make sense of the mess he had created. 2 hours later, Emily arrived. Michael had barely moved since hanging up the phone. He had changed into something more casual, though his nervous energy made him fidget in his seat. The moment the doorbell rang, he felt his stomach twist with anxiety. This was it, the moment when everything would come out. He opened the door to find her standing on the threshold, her face soft but guarded. The pregnancy had made her look even more fragile, as though she were carrying more than just a child. But there was something in her eyes, something calculating. It made him uneasy. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. "You sounded upset on the phone. What's going on?" Michael stepped aside to let her in, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know where to start, didn't know how to begin this conversation. So much had changed since Claire's death, since the lawyer's visit. He felt like a man walking on the edge of a cliff, one wrong move and he would fall. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the couch in the living room. She didn't hesitate, but her movements were slow, careful, as though she could feel the tension in the room. Once she was seated, Michael sat down across from her, staring at the floor for a moment before meeting her gaze. "I don't know how to ask this," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need to know everything. About you, about the baby, about Claire. What the hell is going on?" Emily's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place, but she didn't look away. She took a deep breath, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "You don't know what's going on, Michael? Or you don't want to know?" His pulse quickened. "What do you mean by that?" She leaned forward slightly, her expression softening just a little. "I'm not stupid. I know about Claire's will. I know about the papers the lawyer gave you. But here's the thing, I'm not just some woman you've been sleeping with. I didn't come into this blindly. You think I don't know the kind of man you are?" Michael's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Emily's lips curled into a smile that was almost cruel. "You think this is just about me, don't you? About the affair, the baby, the secret life we've been living. But it's not. It never was. I wasn't just waiting for you to leave Claire. I knew what I was getting into." He shook his head in disbelief. "You knew? How could you have known anything? You didn't even know about the will until now." She nodded, her eyes dark with something he couldn't place. "I knew a lot more than you think. Claire wasn't just sick, Michael. She wasn't just dying. She was planning. She had a plan for you. And I'm just a small part of it. Michael felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. He reached for the glass of whiskey on the table, his hand shaking as he took a sip. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Emily said, her voice steady but full of something hard and unforgiving, "that this whole thing, all of it, was set in motion long before you met me. Claire knew you'd slip up. She knew you couldn't resist. And she wasn't going to let you get away with it." The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the stomach. "Are you telling me Claire planned all of this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded slowly. "Yes. She knew what you were doing. She knew about us, about the baby, and she knew exactly how to make sure you paid for everything. She wasn't just dying, Michael. She was playing the long game. And now, it's your turn." Michael stared at her in disbelief, the room spinning as the truth sank in. Everything, every decision, every action he had taken, had been part of a game. Claire's game. And now, he was the one who was going to lose. Michael's mind was spinning, the room around him narrowing until it felt as though he were trapped in a small, suffocating box. Emily's words still echoed in his ears. Claire wasn't just dying, Michael. She was playing the long game. He could feel the weight of them pressing down on him, suffocating him. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about the people he loved, had been turned on its head. And the worst part? He had no idea how deep the lies went, or how to stop the avalanche that was coming for him. He stared at Emily, trying to read her expression, but her face was unreadable, poker-faced, as if everything about this conversation was a mere game. Her eyes were cold, detached, as though she had already accepted the fate that Michael had just begun to process. She was calm, but there was an edge to her voice that made it clear she wasn't afraid of the consequences. If anything, it seemed as though she was just as prepared for whatever came next as Claire had been. "Is that why you never pushed me to leave Claire?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "You knew all along she had something planned. You knew she was waiting for me to mess up." Emily's lips curved into something resembling a smile, but it wasn't warm. "Of course. I knew the moment I got involved with you that it wasn't just about love. You think I would fall for a married man and not consider the bigger picture? You weren't the only one keeping secrets, Michael." He felt the sting of her words like a slap to the face. She was right, he had been so consumed by his own guilt, his own deceit, that he hadn't bothered to consider what Emily might have been hiding. But now, as the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, Michael could see the truth, harsh and unforgiving. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "What do you want from me, Emily? What was all of this for?" Emily leaned back, the look on her face softening slightly as she studied him. "What do I want from you?" she repeated, as if the question had never occurred to her. "I want what Claire wanted. Justice. She wasn't going to let you get away with what you did to her." Michael's stomach turned. The word justice felt like a death sentence. He had no idea what Emily was truly after, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Claire's plan wasn't just about her own vengeance. It was about making sure he would suffer, making sure he would never escape the truth of his betrayal. "But why now, Emily?" Michael's voice cracked. "Why are you telling me all of this now? Why not just let me live in my own guilt? Why involve me more than you already have?" Emily's eyes flickered, and for the first time in their conversation, Michael saw a glimmer of something vulnerable. It was brief, but it was enough to make him wonder whether there was more to her than he had ever realized. "I thought you deserved to know the truth, Michael. I thought you needed to understand that you're not the only one whose life is falling apart. I'm just as much a part of this as you are. I'm not some victim. I knew what I was doing when I got involved with you." And now, she trailed off, her gaze shifting to the floor. Michael felt a rush of anger rise in his chest, mixing with the confusion and despair that had been his constant companions since the funeral. "And now what?" he demanded. What happens now? Are you planning to expose me to Claire's family? To the world? You think I'm going to just roll over and let you take everything from me? Emily's eyes met his with a calmness that unsettled him even more. I don't want to take everything from you, Michael. But I can't let you get away with this. I won't let Claire's death be in vain. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the growing storm inside him. He wanted to yell, to scream at her for what she was doing to him, for the mess she had made of his life. But something about the way she spoke, the way she held herself, made him pause. It was as though she were no longer afraid, as though she had already come to terms with the destruction they were both a part of. So, what's the next step? He asked, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. Are you going to go public with this? Are you going to tell the police? The press? Emily shook her head. No. I'm not interested in making a spectacle out of this. I'm not like Claire. I don't need to destroy you publicly. I'll leave that to her family. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. But I do have a plan, Michael. A plan that will ensure you never forget what you did. A chill ran down his spine. What do you mean? Just think of it as a way to make you pay, she said softly, almost casually, as if it were a minor inconvenience in her life. You won't be able to move forward until you face the consequences of your actions. You won't be able to run, hide, or bury the truth. It will catch up to you, piece by piece, until you have no choice but to deal with it. Michael's breath hitched. You're going to ruin me. No, Emily said, her voice suddenly firm. I'm going to make sure you understand the damage you've caused. I'm going to make you see the full weight of your decisions. You took everything from Claire, from me, and now, you'll learn what it feels like to lose everything. The coldness in her tone sent a shiver through him, but a part of him couldn't help but feel the truth in her words. He had already lost so much, his wife, his reputation, his sanity, but Emily was right. He hadn't yet faced the consequences. He hadn't yet paid the price for his choices. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he said, his voice faltering. I never meant for any of this to go this far. I didn't want to hurt Claire. I didn't want to hurt you. She stood up suddenly, her gaze hard. You didn't want to hurt anyone, but you did. You hurt Claire. You hurt me. And you've hurt yourself more than you'll ever know. Michael stood up too, his fists clenched at his sides. What do you want from me, Emily? What is it you want me to do? Tell me. Emily stared at him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. Then, with a quiet sigh, she spoke. I want you to face the truth. I want you to take responsibility for your actions. I want you to understand that there are no more excuses. No more hiding. No more running. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt something stirring inside him. It wasn't just fear or guilt anymore. It was something deeper, a desire to fix things, to make things right. Maybe it was too late. Maybe it was impossible. But for a fleeting moment, he felt the urge to stop pretending, to stop living in a world of lies and half-truths. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, his voice rough. But I need to know what happens next. What do you expect me to do? Emily's expression softened, just a little. You'll find out soon enough, Michael. Just know this, it's not over. It's never over. She turned and walked toward the door, her pregnant belly swaying slightly with each step. As the door clicked shut behind her, Michael stood frozen in place, his mind racing. He had never felt more alone than he did in that moment. The walls were closing in, and there was no way out. The silence that followed Emily's departure was suffocating. The air felt thick, every corner of Michael's apartment darkened by the weight of her words. His mind buzzed with questions, but none of them seemed to have answers. What did Emily really want? What was her plan? And more importantly, what was going to happen now that she was involved? The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a constant reminder of the time slipping away from him. Michael sat at his desk, his fingers drumming nervously on the wooden surface. He knew that Emily had a plan, she had made that clear. But what kind of plan? Was it really just about vengeance? Or was there something more? Michael had to get ahead of this. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. The pieces of his life had already started to crumble, and every move he made from here on out would determine how much more he would lose. But how could he fight against something that seemed so much bigger than him? How could he fight against a plan that Claire had orchestrated from the very beginning? He glanced at the glass of whiskey sitting on the corner of his desk, its amber contents almost glowing in the dim light of the room. It was a familiar crutch, a way to numb the chaos that swirled inside him. But today, it felt different. The desperation gnawing at him, the coldness of Emily's warning, it was too much. Taking a deep breath, Michael stood and walked over to the window. The city sprawled out below him, the lights of the skyline twinkling like stars in the distance. Everything seemed so distant, so far away from the suffocating reality he was trapped in. His phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. Michael reached for it, the screen lighting up with a message. It was from an unknown number. His pulse quickened as he opened the text. "I know what you did. We'll be watching. Make no mistake, this isn't over." A chill ran down his spine. The message was cryptic, but the meaning was clear. Someone knew what he had done. Someone was watching him. He had no idea who it was, but it didn't matter. The web that Emily had hinted at was starting to tighten, and it seemed like there was no escaping it. He threw the phone down on the desk, his heart racing. His thoughts began to spiral again. Who was behind this? Was it Claire's family, trying to bring him down? Or was it Emily, playing her own twisted game of retribution? Either way, Michael knew that the walls were closing in on him. A knock on the door broke him from his thoughts, causing him to jump. He wasn't expecting anyone, but the urgency of the knock was enough to send his anxiety into overdrive. He hesitated for a moment before crossing the room and opening the door. Standing there, in the doorway, was a man Michael didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, and his eyes were cold, calculating. The man didn't say a word at first, he just stared at Michael with an intensity that made him feel exposed, as though every secret he had ever kept was laid bare in front of this stranger. "Who are you?" Michael asked, his voice edged with suspicion. The man didn't answer right away. He simply stepped forward, pushing past Michael without asking for permission. Michael took a step back, startled by the man's sudden intrusion. "I'm here on behalf of Claire's family," the man said, his voice low and firm. "They've asked me to speak with you." Michael's heart skipped a beat. He knew that Claire's family would eventually come for him, they had every right to be furious, to demand answers. But he wasn't ready for this. Not yet. "I don't know what you think I've done," Michael said, his voice shaking. "But I haven't done anything illegal. Claire and we weren't." The man raised a hand, cutting him off. "We're not here to talk about your affair, Mr. Thomas. We're here to talk about something far more important." Michael's pulse quickened. The man's tone was cold, but there was something else in his voice, something that sent a wave of unease through Michael's chest. "What's this about?" he asked, trying to keep his composure. The man finally looked at him, his eyes narrowing. "It's about the will." Michael felt the blood drain from his face. The will. Of course. How could he have forgotten about that? The document that Claire had kept hidden, the one that contained her final wishes, her revenge. He had no idea what was in it, only that it had been carefully crafted, meticulously planned. And now, it seemed like the family was moving forward with whatever she had set in motion. "What about the will?" Michael asked, his voice tight with fear. The man's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it. We have a copy. And it seems that Claire had some very specific instructions for you, Mr. Thomas. Instructions that you won't be able to ignore. Michael's mind raced. He had to be ready for whatever was coming next. He had to know what Claire had planned, what kind of trap she had set for him before she died. I don't understand, he said, his voice strained. What do you want from me? What is it that Claire left in her will? The man's smile faded, and his expression grew colder. You'll find out soon enough. But first, we need to make sure you understand something very clearly, Mr. Thomas. Claire's family will stop at nothing to see that her wishes are carried out. And if that means ruining you, then that's exactly what will happen. You will pay for what you've done. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. The weight of them hung in the air, suffocating him. He had thought that Emily was his biggest threat, but now, it seemed as though the real danger was coming from Claire's family. The plan had always been bigger than he had realized, and now it was closing in on him from all sides. The man stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You'll be hearing from us again, he said, his voice cold and final. And you'll regret not taking this seriously. With that, he turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Michael standing there, his mind racing. He couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, and he had no idea how to escape. Hours passed, but the weight of what had just happened hung over Michael like a thick fog. He couldn't shake the feeling that the clock was ticking, that time was running out. He had to act. He couldn't wait any longer to figure out what Claire had left for him in that will. He picked up the phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed the number for Claire's lawyer. He had to know what was in that document. He had to get ahead of this, before it was too late. The phone rang twice before the lawyer picked up. Mr. Thomas, the voice on the other end said, his tone formal but polite. How can I help you? I need to know what's in Claire's will, Michael said, his voice urgent. I need to know what she left for me. There was a pause on the other end, and Michael could almost hear the lawyer's hesitation. Mr. Thomas, I'm afraid I cannot disclose that information to you over the phone. However, I can arrange for you to come to the office to review the will in person. I suggest you do so as soon as possible. Michael's heart sank. The lawyer's tone was colder than he had expected. There was something in his voice that hinted at a deeper layer of complexity, as though there was more to this will than he could possibly understand. I'll be there first thing in the morning, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. Very well, the lawyer replied. I'll see you then. The line went dead, and Michael dropped the phone back onto the desk. His mind was racing, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he was scared. He had no idea what Claire had planned, but one thing was certain, it was far from over. The night had been long, filled with restless moments that only deepened the questions swirling in Michael's mind. The weight of Claire's family's threats, the ominous warning from Emily, and the cryptic messages all collided into one dizzying wave of fear and uncertainty. Michael had spent the entire night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. His mind was replaying every conversation, every look, every word from Emily, Claire's family, and now, even the mysterious lawyer. All these events felt like pieces of a puzzle, and Michael had been desperately trying to fit them together, but each piece seemed to lead to an even darker truth. The moment the sun rose the next morning, Michael knew that he couldn't wait any longer. Today was the day he would confront whatever it was Claire had left for him, and with it, the truth he had been avoiding. His thoughts were racing as he dressed in his best suit, the very one he'd worn to Claire's funeral. The day seemed to be a reflection of his entire life, polished on the outside, but beneath it, everything was decaying. Michael arrived at the lawyer's office, his steps heavy with anticipation. The lawyer's office was tucked away in a quiet part of the city, far removed from the bustling streets he usually walked. It was a classic law firm building, sleek, cold, and imposing. As he approached the glass doors, Michael noticed his reflection in the window. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. The strain on his face was visible, the exhaustion, the fear, the guilt. He had been living with these emotions for so long that they had almost become a part of him. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Richard Dean, was waiting for him in a dimly lit conference room. He was sitting behind a large wooden desk, flipping through a stack of papers when Michael entered. Richard looked up, his expression unreadable, though there was a faint trace of pity in his eyes. "Mr. Thomas," he said, standing up and offering a brief nod of acknowledgement. "I trust you've had a chance to think things over?" Michael didn't respond immediately. His eyes were drawn to the thick envelope sitting in the middle of the desk, Claire's will. He had no idea what to expect, but something about it made him uneasy. Richard motioned for Michael to take a seat. "We can begin whenever you're ready," Richard said, his voice cold but professional. "But I must warn you, this will not be an easy process." Claire's instructions were precise. Michael nodded, taking a seat across from the lawyer. He was acutely aware of the tightness in his chest, the pounding of his heart as he watched Richard pull the envelope closer and open it. He could feel the weight of what was to come pressing down on him. Richard slid the first page of the will across the desk toward Michael. "This is a copy of Claire's will, signed and notarized." He paused, waiting for Michael to take it in. With trembling hands, Michael picked up the document and began to read. His eyes darted over the legal language, each word feeling like a slow, deliberate dagger to his heart. And then, he reached the section that would change everything. "To my dear husband, Michael Thomas, I leave nothing." The words stung. He felt a lump rise in his throat as he read them again, his heart sinking with every passing second. Nothing. All these years, all the promises, the moments they had shared, it all amounted to nothing. But it wasn't just the financial part that shook him. The next line was what truly made his blood run cold. "However, I do leave a final instruction to my husband, to truly understand the depth of his actions and to finally face the consequences of his betrayal. Michael Thomas must sign the attached document and relinquish all rights to his assets and properties. He must publicly acknowledge his affair with Emily Marlowe, and he must be held accountable for the damage he has caused." Michael's head spun. The words blurred as he read them over and over again, his brain refusing to process the reality that was unfolding before him. He looked up from the paper, his eyes wide, his voice shaking. "What is this? What is she trying to do?" Richard didn't answer right away. He simply pushed a second document across the desk, a different paper, one with a bold red stamp at the top that read, "Official Statement of Acknowledgement." "This is the document Claire referenced," Richard said quietly. "It must be signed by you in front of 2 witnesses. If you sign it, it will be made public. All the details of your affair with Emily, all the choices you made, everything you've been running from, will be laid bare for the world to see." Michael felt his stomach churn. The room seemed to tilt as his mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Claire, she had planned this from the very beginning, setting up a trap that would ensnare him completely. She had known. She had known about the affair, about Emily, and about the destruction that would come with it. Richard leaned forward, his voice softer now. "I'm afraid it's not just about your reputation, Mr. Thomas. It's about your soul. This will bring everything into the light. It will expose the man you truly are." Michael clenched his fists. His first instinct was to deny it, to refuse to sign the paper and walk away from this nightmare. But deep down, he knew there was no escaping it. No running. No hiding. Claire's plan had always been about making him face the truth, to make him confront everything he had done. Michael's voice faltered as he looked down at the document. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt her. I never wanted any of this." Richard gave him a sympathetic look but said nothing. He knew that no amount of regret or remorse would change the truth. Michael had been caught in the web Claire had woven, and now he had to face the consequences. Suddenly, the door to the conference room opened, and 2 figures entered. Michael didn't recognize them at first, but as they walked closer, he realized who they were. They were Claire's parents, the ones he had avoided for months since the funeral. The last thing he had wanted was to face them. Especially not now, with everything coming to light. They took seats across from Michael, their faces grim, their eyes filled with silent judgment. Claire's mother, a tall, severe-looking woman with sharp features, spoke first. "Michael," she said, her voice low but firm. "You've brought shame upon this family. You've shattered everything we held dear. And now, you must make it right." Michael looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, he saw the full scope of his actions, the lives he had destroyed, the love he had broken. And in that moment, he realized something profound. Claire had been right all along. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about forcing him to confront the man he had become, to strip away the lies and show him who he really was. He turned back to Richard, then to the papers before him. The decision was clear, even if it was the hardest one he would ever make. There was no escape now. Michael took the pen in his hand, his fingers trembling as he signed the document. The ink flowed onto the page, sealing his fate. The room was silent, the weight of the moment pressing in on him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Claire's father stood and walked over to Michael, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've made your choice," he said softly. "Now, you must live with it." The finality of the moment hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He had spent his entire life running from his mistakes, trying to bury them beneath layers of deception and guilt. But now, there was no more hiding. The truth had been laid bare, and the consequences were inescapable. As he stood up, he realized that his life would never be the same. Everything he had known, the relationships, the secrets, the lies, had been torn apart in an instant. But there was one thing he knew for sure: he would never be able to forget what had happened. Not the affair, not the betrayal, and certainly not the lessons he had learned along the way. Claire had made sure of that.